Adrienne Cole was 38 years old the afternoon her husband of 9 years sat across from her at the kitchen table, folded his hands the way he did when he had already made a decision, and told her he was leaving. She worked as a logistics director for a regional hospital system, a job that required her to manage the movement of everything from surgical equipment to staffing contracts across 6 facilities, and she did it well and without fanfare and for a salary that was comfortable but not remarkable. She drove a 5-year-old Nissan Pathfinder and kept a coupon folder in the glove box and bought her work blazers at the end of season rack, and the people in Terrence Cole's professional circle, real estate developers, private equity men, people whose primary hobby was impressing one another, had always regarded her with the mild, unexamined condescension reserved for women who did not seem to be trying. Quiet Adrienne. Practical Adrienne. Terrence's hospital wife. He told her the woman's name was Gwendolyn Marsh. He told her Gwendolyn was the principal of a commercial real estate firm and had a net worth, by his estimation, of somewhere between $40 and $60 million. He said it the way people said things they expected to land as a wound. He said he hoped Adrienne would understand. What Terrence Cole did not know, what he had never thought to ask in 9 years of sharing a house with a woman he had fundamentally misread, was that the modest salary and the coupon folder and the 5-year-old Pathfinder were choices, not constraints, and that the trust her grandfather had established in her name in 1987 and grown and protected for the next 35 years without a word to anyone outside the family had, by the most recent valuation, reached $500 million. He left for a woman worth $40 million. He did not know he was leaving one worth $500. What happened next did not happen the way he planned. It did not happen the way Gwendolyn planned either. But it happened precisely the way Adrienne had known it would. From the moment she sat across from him at that kitchen table and watched him fold his hands and decide. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning after Terrence left, Adrienne rose at 5:45 the way she always did, made a full pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around her mug and looked out at the garden she had been building for 6 years along the south side of the yard. She had put in the first beds the spring after they moved into the house on Prescott Street in Atlanta, hauling topsoil in a rented truck and amending the clay herself with compost she had sourced from a community facility 2 miles away. 6 years of tending had produced something layered and deliberate, not a showpiece garden but a working one, with herbs she actually used and tomatoes that split at the seams in August, and a fig tree her grandfather had given her as a cutting from the one in his own yard that was now, by her estimation, close to 40 years old. She sat with her coffee and looked at the fig tree and thought about her grandfather. Elmore Tate had been a physician in Atlanta for 40 years, a quiet, meticulous man who had built his practice in a neighborhood where practicing medicine required something beyond competence. It required a particular kind of commitment to people who were not always sure they were worth committing to. He had never talked about money in a way that made it feel like money. He had talked about it the way he talked about everything he built, as something that required patience and consistency and the willingness to do the work before anyone was watching. He had told Adrienne when she was 16 and had asked him what she should do with the savings she had accumulated from 2 years of summer work, "Don't put your name where people can find it. And don't put your money where people can reach it. Build quiet. The noise comes later, if at all, and by then it won't matter." She had never told Terrence about the trust, not because she was hiding it, or not only because of that, mostly because her grandfather had structured it that way by design, in a vehicle that required no disclosure, that lived in a set of documents in an attorney's office in Buckhead, and that had never needed to announce itself because it had never needed to defend itself. Elmore had understood something about visibility that most people only understood after they had learned it the hard way. She met Terrence at a hospital gala 9 years ago. He was in commercial real estate development then, early in his career, with the particular energy of a man who was still becoming the version of himself he had decided to become. He was charming in the way that men on the rise were charming, all forward momentum, all eye contact, all the right questions. He had made her laugh 3 times in 40 minutes, which was not easy. She had thought, this is someone who pays attention. What he paid attention to, it turned out, was surfaces. He was good at reading surfaces. He had read hers and concluded she was exactly what she appeared to be, and he had been sufficiently satisfied with what she appeared to be to marry her, and had remained sufficiently satisfied until a woman who appeared to be considerably more crossed his path at a development conference in Buckhead 18 months ago. He had come home from that conference and kissed her cheek in the kitchen doorway the way he always did. And she had noticed, without noting it aloud, a hotel key card in the breast pocket of his jacket where he usually kept his transit card. Not proof of anything, an inconsistency. She had catalogued it and moved on to the next item in her routine, which was dinner. And she had made dinner with the same care she always brought to it, and they had eaten together and talked about nothing consequential, and she had watched him across the table and thought, something has changed in the calculation. The first sign had been the conference itself. He had come back from it different, in some quality she could not immediately name, more careful about his phone, slower to answer questions about his schedule, carrying himself with a slightly heightened awareness of a man who had something new to protect. She had noted it, she had filed it. The second sign was a dinner reservation she found on a receipt in his jacket pocket. A restaurant she recognized as the kind of place that required advanced planning and a particular intention. The date on the receipt was a Tuesday in February when he had told her he was at a client dinner. She had not confronted him. She had photographed the receipt and placed it back in the pocket and continued to watch. The third sign was Gwendolyn Marsh's name appearing once in a conversation Terrence was having in the study through a door that was nearly but not completely closed. He said her name with a slightly different vocal quality of a man who had practiced saying a name and had not yet finished practicing. By the time Terrence sat across from her at the kitchen table and folded his hands, Adrienne had been watching for 14 months. She had a folder on her laptop she called Project Prescott. She had an appointment already scheduled with her grandfather's attorney for the following Monday. And she had spent 14 months being, outwardly, exactly the woman Terrence had always believed her to be. She listened to him explain. She nodded in the places that required nodding. When he was finished, she said she understood, and she meant it, because she understood very precisely, more precisely than he did. She drove to her sister's house that evening and sat in Renata's kitchen with a glass of sweet tea and said nothing about the trust and nothing about the folder and nothing about the appointment on Monday. She said only that Terrence was gone and that she was going to be fine, and Renata, who had known her for 38 years, looked at her with the specific expression of a woman who understood the difference between someone who said they were going to be fine and someone who already knew exactly how fine they were going to be. "You want to tell me something?" Renata said. "Monday," Adrienne said. Renata nodded and refilled both their glasses and asked no more questions, because she had known Adrienne long enough to know that Monday meant something had already been arranged, and that whatever Adrienne had arranged was going to be sufficient. She had always trusted her sister's arrangements. Adrienne had never given her a reason not to. Some things kept until they were ready to be said. The attorney's name was Franklin Osai, and he had managed the Tate Family Trust since Elmore established it, and had then managed it through Elmore's death 4 years ago without missing a single quarterly review or annual audit. He was 71, unhurried, and had the quality of a man whose entire professional life had been spent knowing things he was not at liberty to disclose and being entirely at peace with that arrangement. He laid the trust summary on the table in front of Adrienne on a Monday morning in October, with the same lack of ceremony with which he laid everything before her. And she looked at the current valuation, $512 million as of the most recent independent appraisal, and felt the same thing she always felt when she looked at it, which was not pride or excitement, but a kind of deep structural recognition. The sense of a foundation she had always known was there. Terrence filed for divorce last week, she said. Franklin looked at her. He is aware of the trust? He is not. He was quiet for a moment. The trust predates the marriage by 16 years. It is a separate property instrument under Georgia law. He has no claim to it, no right of discovery without extraordinary cause, and no mechanism by which he can access it through divorce proceedings. His attorney will confirm this once he learns of its existence, which he will need to do before any settlement conversation can begin. He paused. What does he believe he is walking away from? A hospital logistics director with a 5-year-old Pathfinder. Franklin looked at his hands. Elmore would have found that satisfying, he said. Adrienne smiled. It was the only time she smiled that week. She retained her own divorce attorney, a woman named Celestine Watford, who practiced in Buckhead, and whose particular specialty was what she called asymmetric settlements, meaning situations where one party had significantly more information than they believed the other party had. Celestine reviewed the trust documents and the marriage timeline and the marital asset inventory with the quick, unsentimental efficiency of someone who had seen this structure before and knew exactly which levers to pull. The marital estate itself was not insignificant. 9 years of Terrence's real estate commissions and development fees had accumulated into a shared portfolio of 4 properties, a brokerage account, and a joint savings balance of $284,000. Celestine's first task was to ensure that every dollar of it was properly accounted for, which meant a full forensic review of Terrence's business accounts, because Celestine had seen enough asymmetric settlements to know that men who left for richer women often moved money before the paperwork was filed. She was right. Terrence had transferred $41,000 from a joint investment account to a personal account in September, 3 weeks before sitting down at the kitchen table to announce his departure. He had also, over the preceding 8 months, submitted 3 expense reimbursements to his development firm for client entertainment that Celestine's review flagged as unlikely to survive scrutiny. Dinners and hotel stays whose dates corresponded exactly with dates Adrienne had noted in her 14 months of quiet watching. Not illegal, Celestine said, but informative. They painted a picture of a man who had been allocating marital resources toward a parallel life for the better part of a year. Celestine flagged all of it in her first week of review. Adrienne received this information the way she received all information, noted, filed, added to the record. She still had dinner on the table at a reasonable hour most nights that week, because Terrence had not yet vacated the Prescott Street house, and she was not going to be the one who made the final weeks uncomfortable. She made the same food she always made and answered his questions about her day with the same measured responses she had always given, and did not look at him in a way that would have told him anything he was not supposed to know yet. He thought he was wrapping up his affairs in the house of a woman who did not know how little he was leaving her with. He was tidying his exit from a house whose foundation he had never seen. She continued going to work. She continued managing 6 hospital facilities and 400 supply contracts and 1,000 small decisions that kept the system the size of a small city from losing a single day of operational capacity. She did her job with the same completeness she always brought to it, because the job was not theater. The job was real. It had always been real, separate from whatever else was happening, and she had never needed anyone to validate the reality of it. That was the thing Terence had never understood. He had thought the modest life was a limitation. It was a preference. They were very different things. Tools were meant to work, not shine. The settlement conference was held in Celestine's offices on a Thursday morning in December, 3 months after Terence had left. He arrived with his attorney, a man named Probst, who had a solid downtown practice and who was about to have a profoundly educational morning. Gwendolyn Marsh was not present. Her absence was noted only in the sense that Adrienne registered it once and then did not think about it again. Terence sat across the table with the composed ease of a man who had already decided how this would go. He had the expression of someone who expected to be generous. He had been told by his attorney that the marital estate was the marital estate, and that he was entitled to half of it. And he had done the math on half of $284,000 and the 4 properties, and had arrived at a number he found acceptable enough to be magnanimous about. He looked at Adrienne once, with the particular expression of a man performing the dignity of the situation, and he almost said something that would have been kind in a way that was also condescending. Celestine did not give him time. She opened the folder. She placed the trust summary on the table, a single page, clean, the valuation figure in the upper right corner visible to anyone across the table. She placed beside it the trust instrument itself, dated 1987, bearing Elmore Tate's signature and the notary seal of the attorney who had drawn it. She placed beside that a 1-page letter from Franklin Osai confirming current management, separate property status under Georgia law, and the trust's complete independence from any marital estate claim. She said, "The Tate Family Trust is a separate property instrument established 16 years before the marriage. Its current value is $512 million. It is not a marital asset. It is not subject to equitable distribution. It is not discoverable through these proceedings. Your client is not entitled to any portion of it, and his attorney has been made aware of its existence as of this morning." Probst was already reading. His face had done something brief and involuntary. Terence looked at the number on the page. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Adrienne, and she saw in his expression the full progression of a man who had spent 9 years constructing an understanding of his wife and was now watching it disassemble in real time, not piece by piece, but all at once, the way a load-bearing wall went when the foundation beneath it shifted. He said, quietly, "You never told me. You never asked," she said. Her voice was even. It had always been even. "You looked at me and decided what I was. I didn't correct you because your conclusion was useful and because my grandfather taught me that real security was something you built before anyone noticed you building it." Probst said something to Terence in a low voice. Terence did not appear to hear it. "I'm not here to wound you," Adrienne said. "I'm here to finish this cleanly. The marital estate gets divided according to what Celestine and your attorney agree is fair. The $41,000 gets returned to the joint account before disbursement, and we both go on with our lives." She paused. "I've been ready to go on with mine for some time." She stood, gathered her documents into her bag with the same unhurried precision she brought to every close-out procedure, and walked out of the room with the composure of a woman who had known the shape of this moment for 14 months and had found it to be, now that it had arrived, exactly as unremarkable as she had expected. Not smaller than she had imagined. Not larger. Simply what it was, the last item in a process she had managed from the beginning and was now completing on schedule. The door closed behind her without ceremony. 2 years had passed by the time Adrienne heard about Gwendolyn Marsh, and she heard about it the way she heard most things she had not sought out, through her sister, who had a particular talent for information and the honesty to deliver it without dressing it up. Renata called on a Tuesday evening in October and said, without preamble, the Marsh portfolio collapsed. Adrienne was standing at the kitchen counter, pressing cuttings from her fig tree into small clay pots she had lined up along the windowsill, and she set one down carefully and said, "Tell me." What had happened was the particular kind of unraveling that occurred when a business model depended on leverage that assumed stable conditions in a market that did not remain stable. Gwendolyn Marsh's commercial real estate firm had been built on debt, not an unusual structure, not inherently unsound, but not a structure that tolerated a sustained period of rising interest rates and declining commercial occupancy without significant adjustment. Gwendolyn had not adjusted. She had instead continued expanding, acquiring 2 additional properties on terms that a more cautious person would have declined, and when the correction arrived, it had arrived at the specific speed and scale that eliminated the margin for error she had not left herself. The firm had entered receivership in August. The personal assets, the apartment, the vehicles, the investment accounts that had not been pledged as collateral had followed in the proceedings that came after. What Gwendolyn had left was a legal process and a reputation that had been significantly revised in the commercial real estate community. Terrence had left his own firm the previous spring, citing a desire to focus on personal projects, which was the language men used when circumstances had made staying untenable. He was consulting now, independently, on smaller residential deals, a step down from every level he had imagined for himself. His name had not appeared in the real estate news in 14 months. Terrence had been there for the early part of the collapse, had in fact committed a portion of his own settlement funds to a co-investment in one of Gwendolyn's properties, a decision his former business partner had apparently advised against in terms that were later described by someone who heard them as emphatic. That investment was now in receivership along with everything else. He had lost the better part of $190,000, which was not everything he had settled with, but it was most of what he had expected to grow. Adrienne listened to all of this and then said, "Is she all right?" Renata paused, meaning, Gwendolyn, is she physically all right? Renata said she believed so, that she was living with family in Marietta and was understood to be regrouping. Adrienne nodded, though there was no one to see it. She did not feel triumph. She felt something quieter than that. The particular, unadorned recognition of a person who had understood from the beginning how a structure was likely to perform under load and had simply waited to be proven correct. She had not wanted Gwendolyn to fail. She had not needed her to. She had needed only to be elsewhere when it happened. She had been elsewhere. Thoroughly, intentionally, productively elsewhere. The trust had grown in the 2 years since the settlement, not dramatically, but steadily, the way sound investments grew when they were left to do their work by people who understood that growth was not a spectacle. Franklin had called in September to confirm that the annual appraisal put the current value at $561 million. Adrienne had thanked him and asked about his grandchildren and returned to the supply contract she had been reviewing when the phone rang. She had also, in the spring, agreed to serve as a board member of a hospital equity initiative that Celestine had connected her to, a fund focused on expanding specialty care access in under-resourced communities across the Southeast. Her first contribution to the fund's operating endowment had been $2 million, made quietly and without announcement, the way her grandfather had always made his contributions to the things that mattered to him. There was a man named Elias, a hospitalist physician she had met through the initiative, who was steady in the way that people who worked in hospitals for the right reasons were steady, not because nothing moved them, but because they had learned to be moved without losing their footing. He had asked her to dinner in August, and she had said yes. And they had talked for 3 hours about systems and about care, and about what it meant to build something in service of people who could not yet see it. He asked good questions. He listened to the answers. He did not require her to explain herself more than once. That was enough for her. She was on the back porch on a Saturday morning in November. The fig tree's leaves gone for the season and the clay pots of cuttings lined up inside on the sill, the garden put to bed the way she put it to bed every year with the same patient attention when she thought about her grandfather. She thought about the way he had said, "Build quiet," and about the 35 years he had spent doing exactly that, and about the fact that he had never once seemed to need anyone to acknowledge what he was building. She picked up her coffee and looked at the garden and thought, the work knows who made it. That was the only receipt that had ever mattered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.